Imagine living in Europe several hundred years ago. Narrow, dark streets, houses pressed tightly together, and a person's life completely dependent on laws that today would seem incredibly cruel. In the Middle Ages, punishment for crimes was not merely severe, it was meant to instill fear. People believed that pain could force someone to tell the truth, and public suffering served as a warning to others. Therefore, in many European countries, special interrogation chambers existed, which we would today call torture rooms. In these gloomy dungeons stood devices designed solely to break the body and the will. Some looked like ordinary mechanisms made of wood and metal, but behind their simple design hid unimaginable cruelty. One of the most famous devices was the rack. This was a long wooden frame with a rotating mechanism at its ends. The victim's arms and legs were tied with ropes, and then the executioner began slowly turning the handle. At first, the person would feel only extreme tension in their muscles. Gradually, however, the body would stretch further and further. Joints dislocated, ligaments tore, and sometimes bones broke. The most terrifying part was that this torture could last a very long time. The executioner could stop the mechanism at any moment, giving the person a chance to confess, and then continue stretching them again. These interrogations often took place at night. The stone walls of the dungeons amplified the screams, echoing through corridors of castles or prisons. Sometimes the sound was so loud it could be heard even above ground. But the rack was far from the only device used by executioners. There was another contraption, small and seemingly harmless, held in the executioner's hand. Yet the pain it caused was so intense that many confessed within minutes. This was the thumbscrew. The victim's fingers were placed between metal plates, and a screw was slowly tightened. The pressure gradually increased, causing excruciating pain, cracking joints, and eventually breaking the bones of the fingers. Historians believe such devices were especially popular during religious trials. They were used when a suspect was accused of heresy or witchcraft. Judges believed that if a person was truly innocent, God would help them endure the ordeal. But in reality, most people could not withstand even a few minutes of such agony. And yet there were devices far more terrifying. Some were designed not to cause immediate pain but to inflict suffering gradually. Torture could last hours or even days. One such device resembled a large metal cabinet shaped like a human body. From the outside it looked like a statue, but inside was a mechanism that turned it into a true trap. When the door closed, spikes would pierce the victim's body. And this device became one of the most chilling symbols of medieval torture. The device, shrouded in many dark legends, was known as the Iron Maiden. On the outside, it resembled a tall metal sarcophagus in the shape of a human body. Sometimes its surface even depicted a face, calm and almost indifferent. But inside, dozens of long metal spikes were hidden. When the victim was placed inside and the door closed, the spikes would pierce the body. They were arranged so as not to hit vital organs immediately. A person could remain alive for quite some time, enduring excruciating pain. Historians still debate how often this device was actually used. Some believe such constructions appeared later, more as a symbol of the horror of medieval executions. But even if the Iron Maiden was rare, countless other tools of torture existed throughout Europe that were no less terrifying. One of the most brutal devices was the Judas Cradle. Its design was horrifyingly simple. In the center of a room stood a wooden or metal pyramid with a sharp tip. The victim was suspended above it by ropes, then slowly lowered. The body would gradually be impaled on the sharp point. The pain was unimaginable, but death was rarely instantaneous. The weight of the body caused suffering slowly and painfully. Executioners sometimes lifted the victim and lowered them again repeatedly. This could go on for hours. The goal was not only to inflict pain but to break the person's will. Such methods were often used during interrogations, especially when suspects were accused of serious crimes such as conspiracy or witchcraft. Medieval executioners also inflicted suffering with smaller, almost invisible instruments. For example, there were metal pincers that were heated in the fire. They could slowly crush flesh or tear off pieces of skin. Sometimes these tortures were carried out publicly, in the town square. People were deliberately made to see what happened to those who broke the law. Fear was a cornerstone of medieval society. The more terrifying the punishment appeared, the stronger its effect on the population. But the true symbol of cruel executions became the huge breaking wheel. A person was tied to this wheel, and the executioner would slowly break their bones with an iron mallet. Sometimes the execution lasted a very long time, and the body was left displayed for everyone to see. Even these gruesome deaths were not always the worst methods. Some tortures aimed to destroy not only the body but the human mind. It was these techniques that were particularly used during religious trials. Medieval torture was not limited to physical harm. One of the most terrifying forms of punishment was psychological torture, especially during religious trials and inquisitions. The goal was not just to break the body, but to break the soul, force confessions, and even make people invent crimes they never committed. In many European cities, special interrogation chambers existed. These were small, dark dungeons with thick stone floors and damp walls. Here, the victim was often left alone in silence and darkness. Sometimes a single candle burned on the ceiling, casting long shadows that amplified fear and despair. One method of psychological torment was the water torture. The victim was laid on an inclined wooden plank, a cloth tightly wrapped around the face, and water was slowly poured over it. This simulated drowning, causing panic and the feeling of imminent death. Even if the body remained unharmed, the mind could break. Sometimes executioners used mock executions. The victim might be shown a prepared pyre, execution tools, or forced to stand in front of a crowd. Even without physical contact, fear and psychological pressure were extremely effective. Trials for accused witches and heretics were especially cruel. Accused individuals underwent daily interrogations with constant threats of death. They were deprived of sleep, forced to stand in uncomfortable positions for hours, or exposed to screaming and yelling to create a sense of total helplessness. Many eventually confessed to crimes they had never committed. One of the most infamous tools of mental torture was the chamber of fear, a small, dark room where the person was left in isolation for hours or even days. Food and water were supplied through tiny openings, leaving the victim feeling completely cut off from the world. Over time, consciousness faltered, leading to panic attacks and hallucinations. The combination of physical and psychological torture was particularly effective. For example, combining the rack or the Judas Cradle with prolonged isolation could turn a person into a compliant witness, ready to admit to anything. Public trials added another layer of horror. Victims were displayed on city squares so that everyone could see their suffering. The fear generated by these events reinforced social control and strengthened the power of the church and local rulers. Sometimes the Inquisition employed symbolic tortures. The accused might be forced to wear marks of the devil, hold symbolic tools of the alleged crime, or repeat confessions in front of crowds. Psychological pressure was magnified by public shame and the sense of complete helplessness. This approach demonstrates that medieval society was built on fear. While these methods seem unimaginable today, for people at the time, they were part of ordinary life. When we talk about the dark side of the Middle Ages, we cannot ignore public executions. They were the culmination of the punishment system and a powerful tool of authority and terror. Central squares could gather hundreds or thousands of people. They came not only to watch but to see that the law was strict and merciless, and no one escaped punishment. One of the most terrifying devices was the breaking wheel. The victim was tied to a huge wooden wheel, and the executioner would systematically break their bones with an iron mallet. Often the body remained displayed on the wheel for hours or even days, so everyone could see the consequences of crime. Another gruesome execution method was burning at the stake. The accused, often suspected of witchcraft or heresy, was tied to a post with a pyre beneath them. The process began slowly. Fear was amplified in advance. The accused was publicly tried, demonstrating their guilt to the crowd. Flames, crackling wood, and screams became a potent symbol of authority and horror. Equally terrifying were methods aimed at destroying the mind. The chamber of fear, a small dark room, could hold a person in isolation for hours or days. Psychological torture caused people to lose their grip on reality. Some experienced hallucinations, and many confessed to crimes they had never committed. Torture was not limited to public spaces. In castles and monasteries, victims faced constant pressure, both physical and psychological. Stone walls soaked with moisture, cold penetrating to the bone, dripping water, and echoes of screams all intensified the sense of isolation. Every action of the executioner was calculated to destroy will and self-confidence. Sometimes executions and tortures were tools of political power. Rulers used them to intimidate the population and opposition. Even kings and nobles watched such scenes, understanding that fear and reputation were powerful tools of control. Yet despite all the cruelty, these methods show one aspect of the Middle Ages: human ingenuity and sophistication, even if directed toward destruction. Every device, every execution, every psychological tactic was part of a complex system of authority, fear, and control. Today, these stories are perceived as horrors of the past, symbols of human cruelty and injustice. Yet they also help us understand how fear shaped society, why people believed in miracles, witchcraft, and inevitable punishment. Though the Middle Ages have passed, stories of torture and executions continue to captivate millions worldwide. These dark pages of history remind us of the value of human life, freedom, and justice, and of how far people can go when power and fear become the ultimate measure of control.